Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here, and we're here for another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around, we are here on Iron Sand Desert for a bit of Skaven against Beastmen gameplay. So, in this situation, of course, Beastmen tend to be lightly armored, so armor piercing isn't the most important thing. They only really have two heavily armored units, and that's of course the Gorbel, as well as the Bestigors. Everything else they have is pretty lightly armored. Even the Cygor is sitting only at 50, and everything else is generally 30 or below. So for that reason, I really decided not to bring much armor piercing in this composition, and if my opponent decided to bring Vestigor spam, my decision was that I would simply overcast Wither to bring them down to size. Overcasted Wither, of course, is a minus 60 armor debuff lasting for 50 seconds, which is pretty crazy and is more than enough to really let Plague Monks do the work. So for my front line here, or well, I suppose for my Lord, I had to bring the Lord Scroll, just the most generic competitive pick, I think. He, of course, does have a whole bunch of abilities. He does have minus 5 melee attack debuff. He does have Plague Rash, which is a nice little debuff when he's casting. Pestilent Breath to beat up on squishy units. Blessed with Filth, of course, for poison. Wither for armor debuffs. And then Vermintide just to spawn rats if I need to tie a unit down. We also do have Stand Your Ground, of course, the Rod of Corruption for AoE damage, kind of a short-term Mortis Engine effect, and then, of course, the Libra Bubonicas for single-target yanking. On to the side here, we do have the Plague Priest. Similarly to melt units down, this is really my second counter to Vestigors, because with his AoE Mortis Engine effect with Billowing Death, he can slowly but surely chip away at the health of a unit of, say, Vestigors, and to bring him down to size. The last really armor-piercing solution here that I have is Plague Monk Sensor Bearers in the center, who of course do also have a morale debuff, and they can kind of shred through troops that way. Our front line is composed entirely of Plague Monks otherwise, or largely of Plague Monks. We do have 4 units of Plague Monks out here on the sides. These guys should chew through any Beastmen infantry that they run into very, very quickly. On the far flanks, we do have 2 units of Clanrat Spears, backed by another unit of Clanrat Spears, and Skaven Slave Spears in the center. We do have 2 Night Runners with slings, backed by a single unit of Gutter Runner slingers with poison. And this is so that I don't have to invest too much in shooting. I don't really have to invest in Gutter Runners because they are a fair bit more expensive. But at the same time, or full-on Gutter Runners. But at the same time, I do get a little bit of poison, so I can tie or slow units down. I do have 2 batteries of them, and these guys are really there to shut down any Minotaurs, who of course could tear through this formation fairly quickly. For my opponent, he did decide to bring Malagor. Of course, the Cygor spam, as we discussed in previous videos, is becoming more and more popular, and you can see the Cygor already lobbing its rocks away, trying to whittle down the Sensor Bears, which is a very good target, of course, as they are a very dangerous unit. For his Lord, of course, my opponent did bring Malagor, backed by Gorbel, and the Gorbel, of course, can kind of hack and slash its way through most Skaven infantry pretty easily, and it is backed by a unit of Minotaurs with great weapons, most likely to shut down, for example, shut down the Doomwheels if I brought those. They do have armor piercing, a bonus against large, and are just very, very powerful in that sort of situation. My opponent does have 3 units of Bestigors, backing 2 units of Goreherd, kind of just to provide a bit of a cushion and additional manpower on the front line, but definitely a rather thin front line, or rather thin army, because there's not too much of a front line here, I suppose. The Bestigors, though, are definitely well spread out, which means that Withering will only really be able to hit 1 unit, and that means I won't really be able to get the best of armor debuffs, no matter what I try to do. Cygor, of course, whittling away at my Plague Monk Sensor Bears, and here on the back flanks we do have 2 units of Centigors with great weapons. Once again, I think the reasoning for the great weapons is more to provide some armor piercing to deal with the Doomwheels, and then a single unit of Centigors with throwing axes. Once again, I think really to deal with Doomwheels. I think that is the main reason my opponent invested so much in armor piercing, because normally against Skaven, Stormvermin are very unpopular, so you don't usually need that much armor piercing. Anytime you can't see me start unloading on the Goreherd with shields with my slingers, I do have my spears, trying to keep them close by to help counteract the Centigors if they decide to charge in. In the meantime, though, we are closing the gap. You can see the Plague Monks just plowing straight through, going after the Goreherds. My hope is to buckle the Goreherds with the Plague Monks, and then kind of push around the flanks and pincer the much tankier Bestigors. Over here on the flanks, you can see the Centigors are doing some damage, and unfortunately, my opponent, though, is able to really sneak around towards my backline with the Centigors over here. In the meantime, my slingers are starting to tee off on the Cygor, trying to do a little bit of damage to it. The Cygor isn't really that tanky. It only has 50 armor, so they could whittle it down over time. Fortunately for me, though, my opponent does sneak past a bit with a few Centigors here, but I do still have these Skaven Slaves as well as Clanrat Spears in reserve. I do cast a Wither over here on the flank, which will hopefully allow me to shred through these Vestigors. You can see are down to 10 armor because my opponent cast Mantle of Gorok on them to boost their damage. Over here in the heart of the fray, you can see Lord Skrulk is popping Stand Your Ground, backed by these Plague Monks and Sensor Bears, trying to drag these Minotaurs with great weapons down into the muck. And I do drop Libra Bubonicas on Malagor, who of course has no source of regen, so he will get melted rather heavily. In the meantime, here in the backline, you can see the Centigors are being zoned away with the help of the Clanrat Spears. Centigors, while being pretty potent, have very low melee defense and very low armor, so even cheap spear units can definitely beat them up pretty badly. Over here on the flanks, you can see my shooting has largely been routed, so it's really up to my spears to try to pursue these Centaurs. And unfortunately, my opponent here slips up on his micro and allows the Centaurs to get caught by Clarinet spears. Once again, with that low armor, they will get shredded very, very badly. Centaurs, of course, do not have shields, so any shooting I get off is doing a lot of damage. And you can see here in the heart of the fray, Malagor has been badly beaten up. He is being focused by the Plague Monks, who have in the meantime swept past all of these Bestigors and all of those units. So you can see I will be blocked here. The Clarinet spears who are trying to pursue the Bestigors off the field cheaply are going to get blocked by the Gore Herd. Over here in the heart of the fray, you can see one of the cool things about Night Runners as well as Gut Runners is they do have a decent, they have somewhat passable melee stats, especially as long as their strength in numbers is up. And it's backed by poison in the case of the Gut Runners with poison, so they're kind of able to even drag units like Minotaurs with Grey Weapons down into the muck somewhat effectively, because Minotaurs don't have the best of melee stats. At least not the Grey Weapon ones. Where you can see Malagor does go down, getting brought down by Lord Skrulk himself. Here you can see the good old Plague Priest just rolling around, slowly but surely chipping away at the Gorbel's health as the Gorbel is getting bogged down and surrounded by angry Plague Monks. In the meantime, these Plague Monks over here are tying the Bestigors. And you can see the Bestigors, despite being fairly powerful units, are struggling to just chew through those Plague Monks. Plague Monks aren't the tankiest, but they will hold their ground for a very long amount of time, by Skaven standards especially, and that makes them very, very potent. In the meantime, you can see my Slingers are starting to line up, and they are starting to tee off on the Bestigors. Of course, they're not doing very much damage. Their AP is fairly pitiful, but still, over time, it will add up. Just like Goblin Archers, for example, can over time do some decent damage. You can see the Spearmen are trying to fight Bestigors, which is very bad for them. You can see the Bestigors actually have a decent amount of HP left on them. Unfortunately, though, this my opponent does decide to simply GG out, having lost the majority of his cavalry, his Minotaurs, and being reduced to really just a Gorbel and a handful of Bestigor units. So definitely a very quick, very decisive game. A quick and decisive game, and as you can see, I really do think this is the sort of composition you want to bring if you're dealing with Beastmen. Of course, a lot of people do tend to overcompensate, in my opinion, when they're fighting against Skaven and try to focus very much on countering Doomwheels. If you don't bring Doomwheels are a somewhat expensive investment, but you can often bring units that your opponent isn't expecting, and they're having overcompensated for Doomwheels, will then find themselves with not so good of a composition to deal with whatever you brought. For example, in this situation, my very wide, very infantry-heavy build was simply not something my opponent's army was really capable of stopping or dealing with. The Plague Monk Censer Bears obviously didn't get much kills because they got tied down in the center fighting Minotaurs and the Gorbel and Malagor, so there wasn't really much kill potential for them there. Similarly, Lord Skrulk didn't get anything too fancy. And most of the kills ended up being on the with the Plague Monks. But the you can see the Night Runners with slings did a decent amount of work. They obviously could whittle down the Centaurs. That's one of the cool things, that if you have a very big battery of Gutter Runners and Night Runners, they can actually drag a lot of cavalry down, like light cavalry, down into the muck. They're not total pushovers in melee, and it makes them a very, very dangerous enemy to deal with. Of course, the Plague Monks did manage to just chew their way through the Gores, and backed by the Withering, they can actually deal with Bestigors somewhat effectively, and definitely very effectively for their cost. In the back, of course, the Clarinet Spears, nothing too fancy, but once again, helping shut down those Centaurs, and really, this was something my opponent's composition wasn't really able to deal with. In my opinion, if you are dealing with Skaven, then while you certainly want to bring some units to shut down enemy Doomwheels, I do actually think it's generally a better investment to go with Morgr rather than Malagor, just because Morgr does have regen, and of course Morgr also can summon those Chaos Spawn. And Chaos Spawn are actually really good against Skaven, because Skaven tend to be very squishy infantry with low armor and fairly poor defensive stats, so you can generally tear through them pretty effectively with Chaos Spawn, and just bring perhaps a unit of Minotaurs with Grey Weapons, or I think realistically it's probably better to just bring either Centaurs with Grey Weapons or Minotaurs with shields, because those will handle the Skaven skirmishing much more effectively, while still providing you with some oomph, some mass to stop a Doomwheel if it's rampaging through your backline. The rest of the army, I think, is generally best to just invest in Bestigors. Otherwise, I do suppose that the Centaurs with throwing axes can be decent against Doomwheels. I haven't really tested them out very much, but I do think they can also perform a decent task. But I definitely think that it's not worthwhile to bring Cygors against Skaven, because they are a faction that tends to gap close very quickly and tend to have a lot of spammy units. And of course, they can't really counter the heavy hitters, like they don't really counter Rat Ogres or Doomwheels very well. And the rest, and otherwise, probably Morgr's a better pick. So yeah, I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions about the game or anything like that, be sure to post them down in the comments as well, and I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.